Warning. The next couple of episodes of the Kin series are extremely brutal. Certain scenes may not be suitable for all audiences. I know I didn't have to say it again, but I'm gonna say it one more time. The next couple of episodes of the Kin series are not for children. Viewer discretion is advised. We were on the road heading to Billy's house. My truck was only a two-seater, so Liza and I sat up front and Wally in the bed. He'd brought a rifle and a tomahawk. It was one of them tactical ones, not native style like you might expect. I also had one of my dad's old rifles hanging up in the back of the cab and a revolver in the glove box. We had a bit of a ride, so I figured I'd get something off my chest. "Why'd you leave the mountain?" I asked.
Wouldn't you like to?
"Well, yeah, but why'd you leave my dad behind?" Liza sat quietly for a moment, watching the trees go by out the window.
I was only 17 when I had him. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I wasn't ready for a lot of things. But the idea of raising a child on that mountain was too much. I told your grandfather that I wanted to leave, and that I wanted him to come with me. But his parents held too much sway over him, convinced him that there was no other place to go.
That don't make no sense. You knew how to get away without paying the fee. Why would they want y'all to stay?
I don't know. I guess they'd fallen under the Monday spell, worshipped them like so many others. It was sickening. I tried to take your dad with me, but his grandparents stopped me. Said they'd kill me if I tried taking him away. So, I left.
That must have been hard.
It was at first. I checked on him periodically, made sure he was being raised right.
You came back to the mountain?
Yep. I never stayed long. Just long enough to see that your dad was all right. Nobody ever saw me.
When did you stop checking on him?
When he moved out of your grandfather's house. I hated knowing that he paid that horrible fee to live on his own.
Why didn't you tell him about the dream catchers? He could have left and never had to pay that damn fee.
I guess I figured he wouldn't want to leave. Like his father.
Well, he wasn't like his father. Paying that fee broke his heart. Liza fell quiet again and went back to looking out the window. We drove on in silence the rest of the way and eventually came upon Billy's driveway. The house was hidden a little ways back in the woods. "This is it," I said. Liza tapped on the rear window and Wally jumped out the back at the end of the driveway. He took his rifle and tomahawk and disappeared into the woods. We rode down the driveway and got out of the truck. Billy met us out front with a shotgun in hand. "Well, well," he began. "You found the old hag." George and Sadie came out on the porch behind him and stood by the door with their arms crossed and an arrogant look on their faces. "Yeah, I got her. Where's my mom?" "Slow down there, Mason. Bring your grandmammy on up here first." I looked over at Liza and nodded for her to go ahead of me. We tied our wrists to make the whole thing look more convincing. "That's it," said Billy as we got closer. "I want to get a good look at the one who got away." Suddenly, there was a wet thump behind Billy and a spray of blood off to his side. Sadie's eyes got real big as she let out a petrified wail. Billy turned around. "Georgia?" Wally had stuck his tomahawk into the top of Georgia's head and then quickly reached over and grabbed Sadie. Wally put his boot up against Georgia's back and pulled the tomahawk out of the top of her head. There was a sound like splitting wood as it came out. He pushed her away, and Billy watched in awe as her lifeless body fell at his feet. "You killed my Georgia," Billy said, sounding like a man who'd just lost his soul.
And he'll kill your daughter next if you don't tell us what we want to know.
Liza said. She was untied, although she was never tied tightly to begin with. Billy seemed to be in shock as he turned back to us. He was pale as a ghost. "Drop that gun," I told him, and aimed my revolver at his chest. He didn't hesitate. He put it down and raised his hands. I ain't even sure that gun was loaded, to be honest. Let Sadie go," he begged. "She ain't done nothing." Wally pressed the tomahawk blade more firmly against Sadie's throat. She was trembling like a leaf. Tears were flowing down her cheeks.
"We'll be the judge of that,"
said Liza.
"Now tell us where your sister is."
"I gave her to the Mundys."
"You what?"
Liza sounded surprised. She reached out and grabbed the revolver from my hand as Billy started pleading again. "Please, let's say..." Billy's words were cut short as Liza fired a round into his forehead. He dropped like a sack of potatoes. Sadie started to scream, but Wally cut that short too. I stood at the end of the porch, looking at my dead relatives. I loved them once. It's a tough pill to swallow knowing that maybe they never really cared about me. But as I looked at them fuckers lying lifeless on that porch, I realized that I couldn't care less. They got what was coming to them. Wally had gone over to the truck and grabbed a canister of gasoline and started dumping it all over the bodies in the house.
"Get in the truck,"
Liza said to me. We walked over to the truck and got in. Wally tossed a lit match and sent the house up in flames, then jumped back into the truck bed. "What now?" I asked.
"We need to hurry and get to the Munday house."
"They ain't gonna hurt her. She's a Mundy. We're protected."
"Nobody's protected, Mason. They lied to you. Now get moving."
We'd driven up to the start of my road. In the distance, black smoke from Billy's burning house was building above the tree line. Then we climbed out, and she told Wallet to go scout up top and that we'd wait for him in the woods on the other side of the road. Wallet grabbed his tomahawk and took off through the woods and up the mountain. I reckon he didn't want nothing slowing him down because he took the scope and left his rifle behind with Liza. I took my dad's rifle out from behind the seats, and we headed off across the road. We went a few feet back and crouched behind some trees. The smoke was still building. We figured it was only a matter of time before we'd be hearing the volunteers racing on with their sirens wailing. "How do you know so much?" I asked Liza.
"About what?"
"Everything. The Mondays, the mayor." Liza was quiet for a moment as she looked out to the road.
"I had an older brother,"
she began.
"He was a half-brother. We had different fathers. When he was 8 and I was 3, my mother gave him to the Mondays."
She paused. I could tell her mind was searching some distant memory.
12 years later, he returned. For a while, he didn't talk. He barely even moved. But one day, he woke up and told me everything.
"Like what?"
Well, I'm sure you saw a lot of it yourself. The cages, the cannibalism, the executions, the Wendigo. But he also told me about the Mondays and how they would kill each other, especially if they got a sense that a certain Monday's loyalty was waning.
"That's why we need to hurry up and get my mom."
Yep.
"Do Mondays really not have to pay the fee?"
That part is true. If you're a Monday, it's free to live here. It costs 2 of your own blood to leave.
Why is that?
To convince you to stay, I guess.
You said nobody's protected. Even other families that give up their own children? Liza turned to look at me. She seemed frustrated.
Mason, never trust the word of evil. Everything they say and do is for their own benefit. They promise protection so that those people become more loyal to them. But the Mondays are only loyal to the mayor. If they decide that somebody they promise protection to needs to die, then they won't hesitate to kill them.
It seemed so obvious now that I'd heard it. I guess it's just human nature to trust someone. Just because police enforce the laws doesn't mean they won't break them. Athletes cheat despite that being the rules. Married couples have affairs even though they vowed to be faithful. Some of it's broken word. Some of it's hypocrisy. But if you ask me, hypocrisy is just the breaking of an unspoken promise. A promise ain't nothing but a moment you can look back on and realize you've been fooled. What happened to your brother? I asked. Liza turned her gaze back to the road.
He killed himself soon after.
Wally came creeping up about 20 minutes later. Said he'd seen an old lady, 3 deformed fellas, 2 of the ugliest women he'd ever laid eyes on, and a man in a police uniform. But no sign of my mom. Well, I guess Chief Collins is up there, I said. He'll be armed. Liza looked over to Wally.
Then you take him out first.
Wally nodded. Liza turned back to me.
Mason, you and I are going to drive your truck up there. We're going to talk to them first. They want me, so we'll act as if I'm giving myself up. When I give the signal, Wally takes out Collins and whichever of those inbred fuckers he can. Mason, you're going to grab the rifle from the truck, so make sure it's somewhere you can grab it quickly. I'll have the revolver on me.
The Mondays can take a lot of damage. Dad shot once several times, and the fucker never died.
They can die. Just make sure to aim for their heads.
Liza stood up and told Wally to head back up the mountain and find a spot. Then she stopped him.
Oh, and one more thing. Leave the old lady alive.
The sun was setting as we pulled up to the Monday property. In the distance, we could finally hear the sirens heading towards the fire. All the Mondays and Collins, with his pistol in hand, came outside. Liza and I got out of the truck. "I reckon y'all are the ones who caused the fire over yonder," said Collins.
Yep,
said Liza. Collins looked over at me. "I had a feeling that dumbass uncle of yours would fuck up." "He got what was coming to him," I said. "I suppose you think we'll get ours, too." I gritted my teeth and didn't respond. I so badly wanted to shoot him right then.
I'm turning myself in,
said Liza.
Me for his mother.
Collins laughed. You expect us to believe that? I mean, look. He pointed at the black plume of smoke off in the distance. That ain't the doings of a woman planning to give herself up. I did that, I interrupted. I trusted Billy, and he betrayed me. I was angry. Collins looked over at me and began playing with his mustache. Fine. Liza, stand there and let me search you for weapons.
Where's his mother?
Collins stopped. You gonna let me search her first?
Show us his mother.
Collins turned and looked at Sarah and chuckled. I told you, didn't I? He quickly swung back around with his pistol aimed at the ready. I heard the shot before I saw the impact. A distant rifle had opened up Collins' head. He hit the ground, dead as a doornail. Sarah's eyes darted to our dead kin and then back to me. She let out a soul-piercing scream, an order to attack. Liza had pulled the revolver that had been tucked behind her lower back and was firing shots at the charging Mondays. I could hear the echo of Waller's rifle in the distance as I dove into the truck to grab mine. I swung around and the younger Monday was nearly on me. Suddenly his head snapped to the side and he went down. I quickly looked over to my right and I could see the glint from Wally's rifle in the tree atop the mountain's highest point. Liza had ducked back into the truck to reload, but we weren't dealing with other shooters, so cover didn't matter. 3 of the Mondays were already dead, the younger one and the 2 women, as well as Collins. Bubba and the other male Monday were still alive. Sarah was still screaming. She'd occasionally stop to take a breath and then keep going. It was a loud scream, louder than you'd expect from an old woman, but it wasn't inhuman. I suppose it was her way of communicating with the inbreds. The 2 remaining Mondays were charging us. Bubba was sprinting at me and the other at Liza, who was still busy loading the revolver. I turned and fired at the Monday charging her. The first shot hit him in the chest and barely slowed him down. Then the second one hit his head. He fell to the dirt and slid to a stop. A second later, Bubba collided with me. He was on top of me, but instead of trying to hold me down like he did last time, he was like a rabid animal trying to tear me to shreds. I had the rifle along my chest, trying to keep him off me. He was making incoherent noises and salivating. I was pushing with every bit of strength I had in me, but he was stronger. Sarah was still screaming, then suddenly stopped and yelled, "Baba!" with genuine panic in her voice. A shot exploded into his head, raining blood and matter as he fell limp on top of me. Liza had gotten him point blank with the revolver. Sarah was now crying with anguish. I pushed Bubba off of me, and Liza helped me to my feet. We crossed over to Sarah, who was now more emotional than I thought possible. "Where's my mom?"
Kill me.
Sarah replied.
We'll do worse than that.
Said Liza.
Now tell us where she is.
Sarah didn't respond. She just sat there sobbing. Wally appeared out of the woods and joined us.
Make us speak, Wally,
said Liza. He hung his rifle over his shoulder and pulled out his tomahawk. He grabbed Sarah by her long, greasy hair. She flailed around, screaming for him to let her go. He threw her back to the ground, stepped on her arm, and without hesitation, cut off her hand. She cried out in agony. "Where is she?" he calmly asked. Sarah kept crying. He put his boot on her other arm and brought the tomahawk blade down on her wrist, severing her remaining hand. Sarah cried out louder, but still didn't say anything. Wallace stepped back and pressed onto her leg. Her face was panic-stricken as she watched. He gave her a moment to speak, and then lifted his tomahawk.
She's with the mayor,
she finally confessed. Wally relaxed. Liza moved up to her.
Is she alive?
Sarah's crying began to morph into laughter. Wally brought the tomahawk down onto her ankle. Her laughter returned to wailing again, but only for a moment. She was back to laughing.
Yum, yum,
she said with a pained chuckle. She was rubbing her belly with her bloody nubs.
Tasty, mommy.
She kept laughing. Wally and Liza glanced at each other with concern. I couldn't stand it anymore. I stepped past Wally, put the rifle to Sarah's head, and then silenced her laughter for good. I went into the house and over to the padlocked door. Liza followed after me.
Mason, wait. Don't go in there yet.
I brought the butt of the rifle down on the padlock a couple of times and broke it off.
Mason!
I stepped through the door and began descending into the cavern.